Hello stargazers, and welcome back to another installation of the Sky Tonight Star Show. My name is Nicole, and today I will be your tour guide as we talk about some of the planets, how you can easily find them, and another constellation that you'll be able to look for in the nighttime sky. So last week we talked about the Summer Triangle made up of Vega, Altair, and Deneb here. That can be very easily seen throughout the rest of the season. But since we can see that it is a full moon around the 5th of July, it might be a little bit harder to see some of those constellations. So for a lot of this show, we'll be talking about the planets and some interesting facts about them. Now we have these useful planet labels here, but you might be asking what's the difference between a star and a planet when you're looking at it in the sky. All you have to do is think of the song Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. And so if you take a look at a dot and it looks like it's flashing or twinkling, that means that you've seen a star. Now the planets will remain constant throughout the entire time you're looking at them, and typically they're a little bit brighter, so that's how you'll be able to distinguish the two. Now the moon will be very close to both Jupiter and Saturn around midnight on July 5th or 6th. So take a look at the time I sent here. It's set to 11 o'clock on the 5th, but this will be like that for the couple days after that as well. That's one easy way to identify those two planets, and we'll talk a little more about those in the coming weeks since they will both be at opposition soon, and that means there's a position opposite the sun, which is the best time to view these planets since they're up all night and generally the closest to us for that year. Both of these planets lie on this line here, which is called the ecliptic, and that is the apparent path of the sun across the sky. So remember to keep an eye out for these two, and again, we'll talk about them more later on in the month when is the best time for viewing them. So now I skipped ahead the time and date to July 11th at about 6 o'clock in the morning. So you'll still be able to see Saturn and Jupiter here, but what's most interesting in our morning sky is that Mars is pretty close to the moon. Now to get a different perspective of these planets, I've switched over to the UniView software, which the planetarium uses for all of our live star shows. Now this will help us take a greater look at the planets and even travel to Mars itself. So we'll start by launching off of Earth, and we'll get a good look at our home planet from up above. Now we're going to take our way to Mars, and we can point out the differences between this planet and our home one. Now both Mars and Earth are known as rocky or terrestrial planets, which means they have a hard, solid surface that we're able to land on. So that includes the inner four, also adding Mercury and Venus. Now scientists believe that these planets were formed in a very similar way since they've got a lot of the same structure, and they're sending rovers there to look at and study the surface of Mars in order to learn more about how these rocky planets were formed. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. As I mentioned, one of the rovers that is about to launch to Mars and continue this scientific discovery. So here we've landed at the red planet. Now, the planet itself is actually very different. Its atmosphere is almost entirely carbon dioxide, where Earth's atmosphere is mostly nitrogen. You might have noticed the orbit lines of its moons on the way in. So Mars has 2 moons, whereas Earth only has 1. Mars is also home to the largest mountain in the solar system called Olympus Mons. Now, in order to learn more about Mars, NASA plans to launch the Perseverance rover as part of the Mars Exploration Program, which is a long-term robotic exploration to discover more about the red planet. Now, this rover will have a drill that collects core samples of promising rocks and soils. They'll then put those samples aside and send them back to Earth on a later return mission. They also hope to gather knowledge and demonstrate those technologies which will address the challenges of human exploration of the planet in the coming decades. The goal is also to seek signs of microscopic life, explore the geology of the crater landing site, and eventually pick up the findings that they've learned there and transport them back to Earth. So in total, this will study the red planet's geology and test how astronauts on future missions could produce things like oxygen from the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and they could use that oxygen for, of course, breathing and rocket fuel. Now this is set to launch July 30th of 2020, and that's when Earth and Mars are in a good position relative to each other. so that it takes less power to travel and keeps the mission costs and risks relatively low. And because of the position of these planets, launch opportunities come up every 26 months. So if it didn't go this summer, they would likely have to wait until September of 2022 to try to launch again. But fingers crossed, everything will go as planned and it will launch at the end of July from Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. It will land February 18th of 2021, and the mission duration is spent to last at least 1 Mars year, or 687 Earth years. Now this picture shows an artist's concept of the sky crane maneuver during the descent of NASA's Curiosity rover to the Martian surface. And the Mars mission launching in 2020 would leverage the design of the landing system and other aspects of the Mars Science Laboratory architecture, according to an article from NASA and the JPL. So the constellation I want to talk about today is only visible for a little bit while longer. So make sure you get outside and see it as soon as you can. So now I'm back using Stellarium because it's a lot easier to point out the constellation lines and the shapes using this program. Now you remember we talked about the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper in my last show. I'll just remind you, here's part of the Big Dipper, the asterism in the constellation Ursa Major. And over here is the Little Dipper, or Ursa Minor, with Polaris, or the North Star, at the tail. So the Big Dipper is actually very important in finding our constellation today, which is called Leo the Lion. So I'm going to turn on the constellation lines to help you figure out an easy way to identify it. Basically, you're going to take the ends of the Big Dipper right here, and if you follow these two stars, they will point down to the popular star in Leo the Lion, which is called Regulus. Now, Regulus is about 79 light years away from the Sun. It is the brightest star in the constellation Leo, and the 21st brightest in the nighttime sky. Now it's Latin for prince or little king, and it also means heart of the lion in Arabic. Now what's so cool about this star is it's actually a quadruple star system. So there are 4 stars there organized into 2 pairs. And the rapid rotation of this star causes the equatorial region to bulge, so it looks more like an egg shape than a perfect sphere. Now it's more than 1 billion years old. It also sits on the path of the ecliptic. But you won't be able to see it much longer during the year. It sets by about 10 at evening, so take a look for the star as soon as it gets dark. It will mostly lie in the western region, so look low to the west about an hour after sunset, and you'll be able to see the star Regulus, along with the entire constellation of Leo the Lion. I think it's also easily identified by this triangle, which depicts the hindquarters and the tail of the lion. And there's another famous asterism located in here, with this backwards question mark shape, which is called the sickle. And that, of course, represents the head and the mane of the lion. So that's another easy way to help you identify that shape. Now, like I said last time, a lot of these constellations are rooted in mythology, and this one is no exception. It stands for the Nemean Lion, which was the beast killed by Hercules during the first of his 12 labors. Legend has it that no one could kill the lion because no weapons could pierce its skin, but Hercules was able to defeat it by strangling it, and because it was such a mighty beast, he commemorated it in the sky. But like I said, you can't see it for much longer, so just make sure to take a look for it right after sunset, and then it will be setting in the western region. So I only wanted to talk about one constellation today since we spent so much time looking at Mars. But there's also another constellation called Leo Minor close by. If you want an extra challenge, you can look for this shape of the little lion. Just remember you can use Ursa Major, these 2 lines of the Big Dipper right here, which will point to Regulus in Leo. And then you can find that backwards question mark shape of the sickle, even the triangle at the tail, to help you find the rest of Leo. Also remember that you can take a look for Saturn and Jupiter in the southeastern sky, be easily identified since they're close to the moon. And keep an eye out in the next couple weeks for some more videos explaining facts about those 2 planets. So thank you for joining me for another night sky tour. I hope you were able to learn a little bit more about Mars, or Leo the Lion, Tune in next week for more talks about Jupiter and some other constellations in the summertime sky. Happy stargazing!